Robber barons. This presentation argues that the introduction of robber baron industrialists has left a legacy which shapes this country to this very day. Group 10, Alex Boyles, Michael Sanchez, Brian Lindsay, Danny Earp, Ryan Smith. This topic touches on the following larger themes of history discussed in class, such as immigration, growth, industrialization, capitalism, big business, and inequality, and explains the present circumstances by showing the origin, the response, and the relationship between big business and the United States.
It was a fractious time in which a sense of desperation amidst growing wealth was emerging.
Increasingly, workers begin to say, if I, as a member of this society, lack the ability to pay my bills and to feed my family, then I am not a free citizen of a healthy republic. I'm something else, something that the Founding Fathers would not recognize.
The magnitude of the late 19th century transformation of American society is hard to exaggerate. It was as if you woke up in one country and you went to bed in another.
What is the Gilded Age? The Gilded Age was an era that occurred in the years between the Civil War and the turn of the 20th century. The Gilded Age was an era of rapid economic growth, particularly in the northern and western United States. What were the robber barons? It was a term used as a negative reference to businessmen and bankers who dominated their industries and obtained huge personal fortunes, typically as a direct result of pursuing various anti-competitive or unfair business practices. Who were the four main robber barons? The four main captains, pictured below, of industry and robber barons were wealthy and elite. They became rich through unethical and deceitful business practices. The four main captains were John D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan. Hidden under the prosperity of the glamorous and wealthy were three major problems of the Golden Age. Number one, poverty, having a significant low income. Number two, unemployment. It rose almost 50% in some states. And lastly, number three, corruption. It led to some Reconstruction or the Progressive Era. Poverty. In the 1890s, the rich wore diamonds while the poor wore rags. 11 million out of the 12 million suffered from poverty, making an average salary of $1,200 annually. Of that group, the average yearly salary was $380. This forced rural Americans and immigrants to go into urban areas. The poor lived in overcrowded apartments with less than adequate plumbing and ventilation. Unemployment. This lasted from 1880 to 1910. The stock market crashed, banks and other businesses went under, leaving millions unemployed, homeless, and hungry. Corruption. Rich people got richer and the poor people became more poor. Political corruption skyrocketed during this time because corruptions bribed politicians to make sure there were government policies favoring big businesses over workers. This resulted in workers fighting back because of the inequality, and they formed labor unions. The Sherman Antitrust Act. Proposed by Senator John Sherman in 1890, the federal legislation was put into law because of their corruption. Congress now prohibits monopolies, trusts, and cartels. This allows for economic fairness and prohibits activities that restrict interstate commerce and competition. This help the small business owner. This is a time where racism was at its worst in the U.S. than any other time in the American Civil War. African Americans found it extremely difficult to get ahead. They faced segregation in schools, hospitals, restaurants, and were banned from some stores, lunchrooms, and fitting rooms. They had little to no legal resource in the system because they were not prohibited to vote. Even the wealthy found it to be difficult to succeed. Pendleton's Civil Service Reform Act. U.S. federal law passed 1883 where federal employment was based on the merit rather than the political activity or political affiliation. Actions were prohibited to discriminate on marital status as well. During this time, local government operations substantially improved. Great inventions. The following inventions pushed industrialization to great heights during this time. Some of the most important inventions were the telephone, light bulb, radio, typewriter, motor, railroads, and power generators.
Alright, so now on to the most influential robber barons. The three most influential robber barons were Cornelius Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan, and John D. Rockefeller. And here is a picture of each. We are going to start with Cornelius Vanderbilt. In 1810, he bought his first boat and used it to ferry people between Staten Island and New York City. He was only 16 years old. In 1812, he started to expand his operation during the War of 1812, where he supplied government outposts around the city. He continued to expand after the war until 1818, where he sold all of his boats and went to work for Thomas Gibbons. This is where he learned how to run a steamship company and earn his capital to start his own. In 1829, he started his own steamship company. He ended up gaining control of the Hudson River, where he cut fares. His competitors knew he was going to run them out, so they paid him a lot of money to move from their area. After moving, he concentrated on the northeastern seaboard, offering transportation from Long Island to Providence and Boston. And just by 1846, Vanderbilt was already a millionaire. In 1850, he starts shifting towards the railroads. He bought so much of the New York and Harlem Railroad lines, he ended up owning all of them. Then he added the Hudson River Railroad and the New York Central Railroad. He then got the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad. By adding these two to his inventory, he was able to offer the first rail service from New York City to Chicago. During the later years of his life, he started construction on the Grand Central Depot, now known as the Grand Central Terminal in New York City. As his days dwindled, he started to give and leave money. He gave $1 million to Central University, now known as Vanderbilt University, $90 million to his son William, $7.5 million to each one of William's 4 sons, and then the rest of his earnings went to his second wife and 8 daughters. Now on to J.P. Morgan. In 1857, he began his career as an accountant with the New York firm of Duncan, Sherman and Company. This was the American representative firm of the London firm George Peabody and Company. In 1861, he became the agent for his father's baking company in New York City. And then in between the years of 1864 and 1871, he was a member of the firm Dabney, Morgan and Company. And in 1871, he became a partner in the firm Drexel, Morgan and Company in New York City. This firm ended up becoming the predominant source of the U.S. government financing. It was later rebranded as J.P. Morgan and Company in 1895, which was then one of the most powerful banking houses in the world. With his link with the Peabody firm, he had great connections with the London financial world, which provided him with much-needed capital to start producing industrial corporation in the U.S. With that, he began organizing railroads in 1885. He arranged an agreement with 2 of the largest railroads in the United States, New York City Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad. And in 1886, he reorganized 2 major railroads with the hopes to stabilize their financial base. With that, he became a board member for these railroads and other railroads and made a great impact. And to round out our 3 most influential robber barons, we have John D. Rockefeller. He started his first business, which was a commission business for hay, grain, meats, and other goods. In the 1860s, he sensed the commercial potential of the oil field in western PA was rising. And in 1863, he built his first oil refinery near Cleveland, and it was the largest refinery in the area within 2 years. In 1870, Rockefeller and a few associates started the Standard Oil Company. The company started to buy out all of its competition and owned almost all refineries in the area by just 1872. He was able to negotiate with railroads for better rates on shipments of oil, and by doing this, he acquired pipelines, terminal facilities, and competing refineries in other cities to try to expand the market in the U.S. and out of the U.S. In 1881, he established the first trust and set the pattern of organization for monopolies. He did this by placing the stock of the Standard of Ohio and affiliates in other states under the control of 9 trusted people with him as the head. And in 1882, Standard Oil had near a monopoly in the U.S. In 1890, U.S. Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, and in 1892, the Ohio Supreme Court said that the Standard Oil Trust was violating that law. Rockefeller then dissolved the trust and dispersed it to the same 9 men in companies in different states. And in 1899, the trust was brought back together as Standard Oil Company, New Jersey. And this existed until 1911, when it was then again pronounced illegal, but this time by the United States Supreme Court for violation of the same Sherman Antitrust Act. After all that happened, he turned his attention to charities and benevolence in the 1890s. In 1892, he made the founding of the University of Chicago possible. He had given the university around $35 million before his death in 1937. In 1897, he devoted himself to philanthropy. He created major philanthropic institutions in association with his son, John D. Rockefeller. These include Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now known as Rockefeller University in New York City in 1901. The General Education Board in 1902, and the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913. His benefactions throughout his life equal more than $500 million. And now to round out the greatest robber barons, we have 2 honorable mentions, Andrew Carnegie and Henry Ford. And here are a picture of each of them. We are going to start off with Andrew Carnegie. In the 1870s, he co-founded his first steel company near Pittsburgh. He created a steel empire by maximizing profits and minimizing inefficiencies over the next few decades. He did this through ownership of factories, raw materials, and transportation infrastructure involved in steelmaking. In 1892, his primary holdings were put together to form the Carnegie Steel Company. This company ended up being bought by J.P. Morgan because of a strike by the workers that made the company cripple for 4 decades. After the fall of his steel company, he devoted himself to his philanthropy work. In 1889, he wrote an essay called The Gospel of Wealth. He gave away about $350 million to fund over 2,500 public libraries, purchase and give away over 7,500 organs to churches, and gave money to other organizations. He also gave $1.1 million for the land and construction of Carnegie Hall, the New York City concert venue. And because of his financial gifts, the Carnegie Institution for Science, Carnegie Mellon University, and the Carnegie Foundation were all founded. And to round out our honorable mentions, we are ending with Henry Ford. He was hired as an engineer for the Edison Illuminating Company and quickly worked his way up the ranks and was promoted to chief engineer in just 2 years of working there. When he was not on call, he worked on creating a gasoline-powered horseless carriage. And in 1896, he finished the creation of the quadricycle, a light metal frame with 4 bicycle wheels and powered by a 2-cylinder, 4-horsepower gasoline engine. He came together with some investors to form the Detroit Automobile Company, later named the Henry Ford Company. His investors became impatient with him because he was always making improvements, so production was behind. And because they became fed up with him, he left the company. The company then became known as the Cadillac Motor Car Company. The next year, he established Ford Motor Company, and in 1908, the Model T made its debut and was an immediate success. He started to practice the techniques of mass production, including large production plants with standardized and interchangeable parts and the mass assembly line. He built a massive industrial complex after he bought out all minority stockholder after a court battle with Horace and John Dodge. The complex included a glass factory, steel mill, assembly line, and all other needed components to produce automobiles.
Labor unions were born out of medieval-era trade guilds, which were a group of tradesmen who all worked the same craft. An example would be a mason's guild, where they would share trade secrets. Similar to unions, they had an apprenticeship program. They would try and protect members and settle disputes. Labor unions began in earnest with the onset of the Industrial Revolution. Around the time of the Industrial Revolution, there was an economic system called laissez-faire, which is French for allowed to do. Essentially, the government plays little to no part in the economy, and business is left to self-regulate through supply and demand. This form of economy is disastrous for the working class and benefits the ultra-wealthy. If you had the misfortune of being born to a working-class family before labor reform, you were doomed to a life of hardship. Typically, you would wake up in a crowded, dirty, vile-smelling house and head to work. Everybody went to work, men, women, and children. I included a quote from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which paints a realistic but grim picture of existence. You could say the labor movement is a uniquely American institution, as both were born at the same time with ideals of inalienable rights. Strikes and proto-unions developed in the late 18th century. While most early unions dealt specifically workers of a particular city, by the 1850s, countrywide organizations such as the Knights of Labor and National Labor Union appear. The Knights of Labor and National Labor Union both appeared at roughly the same time. They also dissolved within years of one another. Neither group could be called radical, though the Knights of Labor were more willing to organize a strike in order to put pressure on corporations. Poor policy ended the National Labor Union, whereas poor public opinion following the Haymarket Square riot was the Knights' undoing. An uneasy peace between workers and the Union Pacific Railroad was broken when a Knights of Labor member was fired without cause. The Knights called a strike, and in response the railroad calls in strike breakers and the Pinkerton Detective Agency for quote-unquote security. Tempers flare and a train is derailed. State militia arrive and the strike is called off. The Knights of Labor were no more. The day the Great Railroad Strike ends, a protest begins in Chicago. The issue was police brutality against striking workers. The rally may have had some impassioned speeches, but the overall mood was calm. Calm until the police arrive. Chaos ensued, and someone throws a bomb into a crowd of police. 8 men are convicted of murder, and public opinion for the labor movement dwindles. During an economic downturn, the Pullman Railcar Company reduces wages by 25%. Workers attempt to meet with company heads to discuss this and other complaints, but were turned away and fired. A strike is called and other railroad workers joined in. Once again, the United States government intervenes and violence erupts. The strike is ended by force. You can't read the news today without seeing something about workers' rights. Be it demanding a living wage, Amazon workers trying to unionize, or protesting abysmal working conditions. Men gave their lives for causes such as this, and from their struggles a new era of progressive politics came forth. But over these 150 years, how far have we come? Were their lives in vain?
Big Tech. These are the largest and most prestigious companies in the tech industry. These companies are often called Big Five. The Big Five include Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft. These 5 companies have been the most dominant in the 21st century. Alphabet is also Google, for you to know. Comparison to the robber barons. These 5 companies compare with the robber barons of the 19th and 20th century because they really do control the 21st century because of how powerful these companies actually are. It is just harder to see how powerful and how much like robber barons they are. The first big tech company is Amazon. Amazon is a big tech company owned by Jeff Bezos. This company allows you to buy products online and have them delivered straight to your home. Amazon prices can sometimes be more expensive and people will still buy these products because of the convenience it gives them. But it is also referred as a robber baron. The next company we'll be going over is Meta, formerly known as Facebook. Meta is a company owned by Mark Zuckerberg. Meta is in charge of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, which are all commonly used social media in present times. And it is a robber baron because of how it can gain money through these platforms. The next company is Google. Google is a search engine that also owns numerous things such as YouTube, Fitbit, and Kaggle. It is owned by Sundar Pichai and is more powerful than we think. Google is used every day by millions of people. It is called a robber baron because of how much it owns and is in charge of the tech world. Next company is Microsoft. Microsoft is a company that produces software, consumer electronics, computers, and other related services. It is owned by Bill Gates. Microsoft sells anything from smartphones to computers for millions of people each year. They are a very prestigious company, but people feel they're also robber barons because of the prices of their products. Apple, which is owned by Steve Jobs, is a company that produces computer products, consumer electronics, and online services. They are the most valuable company in the world as of January 2021. They are highly known for their signature iPhone and their computers such as their MacBook. And they are robber barons similar to Microsoft with their products' prices compared to their performance. Going into some present-day robber barons like owners, Jeff Bezos. He is the owner of the company Amazon. He was involved in a scandal of April 2021, which included how little breaks his employees were actually given. Some of his employees were forced to urinate in bottles during their shifts. He has also been called a robber baron of the 21st century because of how hard it is for his employees to use a restroom just to make company goals. The next present-day robber baron is Elon Musk. Musk is the owner of companies such as Tesla and SpaceX. He is called a robber baron because his employees had to take a pay cut due to COVID-19, while his net worth was soaring up in the high billions. Many of his employers are unhappy because of this scandal. The last and final current day robber baron is Bill Gates. He's the owner of Microsoft and is called a robber baron because of how high his software prices can be. People feel that he is robbing them with the prices compared to the quality of some of his products that he puts out.